Hey, great for us to be here today on a very miserable week, hasn't it been? And we're kind of like these Europeans with a pipe and with a beanie, thinking about the big things of life. What is the meaning of life? I think the weather is kind of corroborating. It's it's making us stop and reflect. But hey, it's great to be here. My name's Toby, and I'm the pastor here, one of the pastors here, and this is the question we're asking. And during the message today, you'll notice if you go to the website sli.do/vine, you can ask a question. It can be on anything, preferably on this topic, but you could ask anything you want, and we'd love to explore. So in February this year, we as a church, we set out to asking our friends and family that if they had if they had a question that they could ask God, what is the question that they would ask God? And we took a whole bunch of responses and bundled them up under 4 kind of topics. And the next 2 weeks, then plus Easter, we're looking at the top 4 questions people had. Is there meaning to my life? Why does religion cause division? Why is there so much suffering? And God, if you exist, why do you make yourself clearer to me? So that's what we're going to be doing over the next 3 weeks, including Easter. And one of my friends at school, it's my son's girlfriend's parent, her mum. My son's like in year 2? He's been dating this girl for the last 4 years, so it's very serious. He's already proposed and she said yes, and they're going to get married in England. But anyway, her mum, my son's girlfriend's mum, I asked her the question, and she was really surprised. She was impressed because she feels most of the time churches are answering questions no one's asking. And she's like, this is great. And she gave me one of her questions, which we'll answer on Good Friday. But maybe you've been brought along today because you answered, and you had a question, and maybe it was even this question, is there any meaning to my life? And because that's where we're starting today. Now, I think for a lot of my life, I have been asking that question. I remember as a kid, do you remember as a kid, life was just so boring? Was that just me or was that everyone else? Like, always waiting for something to happen. I didn't have an iPad like they do these days to stay constantly entertained. There was nothing good on television, like cartoons in the morning and the Arvo, but nothing during the day. So if you had a sick day, it's like, what do you watch? Like Days of Our Lives? I don't want to do that. So as a kid, you're always, what's the point? Always waiting for something to happen. And then you become a teenager and stuff does start to happen, but you got to go to school. At school, you're constantly told what to wear, what to do, where to go, what not to do. It's just like, I want some freedom. Is this my life, really? Just constantly getting told what to do? What's the meaning of my life? And then you go to uni and you're like, finally, I've arrived. I've got the freedom to do what I want to do. Problem is, I didn't have the money to do what I wanted to do, right? Got all the time, I've got the car, but I don't have any money to go on adventures. And then you get a job and you're like, great, now I've got money to do what I want to do, but now I don't have the time to do what I want to do. Do you remember the moment, do you remember when you first get your full-time job and you're like, this can't be it, can it? I've got to do this. Wake up at 5, go exercise, come back, make my lunch, get on public transport, go to work, come back from work, cook dinner, iron the shirt, go to bed. You're like, what the heck is that? The rest of my life for the next 50 years? What is the point of my life? And then, you get married and you have kids, and you're like, surely that's the meaning of my life. But no one tells you that actually marriage is bloody hard. Not as fun as it looks like from the outside. And then you have kids. And I remember when I had my kid, Maisie, my eldest, she got sick with, I think, bronchitis. And I looked at her in my arms. I'm like, I've brought someone into the world who's going to die. And I had this very powerful moment. I'm like, I brought a child into this world. You idiot. What have you done? I just remember thinking, she'll probably die without me there. And I'm like, this ain't good. What's the point of this? And then 2 weeks ago, I turned 40. And as you know, in your 40s, you have an existential crisis. And that's because in your 20s, You have all these dreams. In your 30s, you start making those dreams a reality. And then in your 40s, you realize none of them have come to fruition. And you have to come to terms with the fact, well, those dreams I had in my 20s, I haven't arrived. I thought that it would bring me meaning in life to have this, and it hasn't arrived. And maybe that's where some of you are at. Maybe you thought your life would turn out a different way to the way it has, that you thought the meaning of life was a relationship, and yet that's broken down or it hasn't come along. Maybe it's a cause, but you've lost faith in the leaders of that cause. Maybe it was your career, but you're feeling tired. So I think, this question, is there any meaning in life? It's a question we do all ask. It's a question I've asked. So the question is, well, is there an answer to that question? And I'm going to present to you the two answers that our world offers us, and then I'm going to offer you the answer that Jesus offers you, and I want you to see, well, which would lead to more meaning in your life? So the first option, the first answer to this question, is there any meaning to my life, is this. Option one is, no, my life does not have any meaning. Life just happens. So yesterday I went and got a haircut, looking sharp, and went to a new barber, and I rocked up, got my hair cut, went to the cashier, had my phone out, ready to do PayPass. He said, sorry, we don't have a machine, you need cash. I'm like, I don't even have a card to go to a bank. I can't even get you cash. He's like, well, come back on Monday morning and give me the money. Now, what's the point of this story? I have no point. It's just meaningless events. And many people say that's life. Life is just a series of meaningless events. There is no overarching point. There is no overarching meta-narrative behind the universe, that we are merely the products of blind, naturalistic, evolutionary procedures. That's what you and I are. And your existence has no more or no less meaning than the existence of a flea, the stinging nettle, or some junk in a graveyard. We are just matter. We are just stuff. Now, if you think that's a little bit, no one really thinks that. No, people really do think that. So this is Yuval Noah Harari, who's written one of the best-selling books. He keeps pumping out books. Everyone's reading them. And this is his book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. He's a secular historian, so not a Christian, a secular Jew. He's a philosopher, best-selling author. And in this book, Sapiens, this is exactly what he says. He says, as far as we can tell from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans, the outcome of blind evolutionary processes that operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan. And if planet Earth were to blow up tomorrow morning, the universe would probably keep going about its business as usual. As far as we can tell at this point, humans would not be missed. Hence, any meaning that people inscribe to their lives is just a delusion. A little bit negative for a Sunday morning, but what he's saying is deep down, what holds all of us is we're just atoms and molecules. I'm just another part of life on the planet, just another animal, and really the events of my life, there's no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no purpose, there's no designer behind all of this. There are just events. Now, the problem with this view is that no one really lives like this. We all live as if there is an overarching story to our lives. It does matter when we see injustice. It does matter the way we look after this planet. And it does matter that we call people to be morally accountable for the lives they live. Things do matter. So for me, my life has no meaning. No one really lives that way. Which leads us to the second option. Is there any meaning to my life? Many people answer that question, yes, the meaning I create for myself. So remember when you were a kid and you used to go to school, and if you went to public school like me, there was a uniform, and the uniform was a t-shirt. You could wear whatever shorts you wanted, whatever shoes you wanted, but you had to wear the same t-shirt. If you went to a private school, there was a shirt, a tie, a jacket, a hat, pants, shoes. There was a big, and if you went to one of those Rudolf Steiner schools, you could wear whatever you want, right? As we become adults, we do the Rudolf Steiner thing. None of us are wearing uniforms. We decide, am I going to wear boots or sneakers or thongs? Am I going to wear a hat, a scarf, a jumper? You get to decide that for yourself. And it's the same with your life. You create your own purpose. Maybe your purpose in life is traditional, to have a family, or maybe you want to volunteer and make a difference in the world, climb a mountain, surf huge waves, be an artist, whatever it is, whatever you want to do, knock yourself out, go for it. It's your life. You get to decide what the meaning of your life is. Now, the problem with this is that it becomes a tad arbitrary. You have no external reference point to work out whether the meaning in your life really is something you ought to give your life to. So I wonder if you've ever been at a traffic light, red light, and you're daydreaming a little bit, and just out of the corner of your eye you see a car moving beside you, and you can't work out, are they moving or are you moving? You have that experience? And what do? You put the brakes on, and then you look up and out the window to look at something that is fixed, immovable, and objective, a tree or a building. But what would happen if the trees and the buildings were all moving as well, that there was no objective, fixed, external point in order to work out where you're at? You know, the idea that I create my own meaning is exactly a world where everything is meaning. You create your meaning, I create my meaning, we're all creating our meaning, and the problem is there's no point of reference to work out whether you're progressing or regressing. So my friend Sam Chan, he says, you know, if I say I'm going to leave my job and spend the year giving malaria vaccines in Africa, you'd be like, wow, that's a great purpose to live by. That work would really have great meaning to your life. But if I said, I'm going to leave my wife and kids and have an affair with the neighbor next door, you'd say, not such a noble meaning to live by. But the problem is, why are you judging my meaning? I thought I have the right to create my own meaning in my life. Problem with that is, it becomes arbitrary. Why is giving malaria vaccines in Africa a better meaning to live by than me having an affair or me playing computer games and eating donuts all day? If we all get to decide what our meaning is, then nothing really is meaningful apart from our own fickle little choices. So I think what we actually need, and to quote my friend Sam Chan, he gave me this language. He says, we need a story bigger than our own story. You need a story bigger than just your own story for you to have real meaning in your life. Now this week I picked up this book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Has anyone read this book? A bunch of us. Cracker, right? It's on the top 100, top 20 books of the 20th century, written by a man by the name of Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor. And he spent time in 4 death camps in World War II, including Auschwitz and Dachau. And he writes this book reflecting on the experience of suffering in the death camps and what it was that enabled people to survive, who gave up and who actually were able to endure the hardships. And he said it was those who had a transcendent meaning in their life who were able to survive the hardships of the death camp. And in the book, he says that he tells the story of 2 women, and he contrasts them. He says there's this one woman that he met, and who through the fortunes of life was born beautiful, she was popular, she was rich. And there was another woman he met, he was doing some therapy with, And through the misfortunes of life, she had a child with a severe disability, and it was set to her to raise that child. And he asked both of these women to think about, to imagine being at the end of their life and looking back on their life. And he said, is your life meaningful? And he found the woman who is popular, rich and beautiful, she said at the end of her life, this is what she said. She said, I had a lot of money, I flirted with a lot of men, and I went to a lot of parties, but really, looking back on it all, I'd find my life empty, self-absorbed, and unfulfilling. And then the woman who had a child with severe disability, as she's reflecting back on her life, she says, wow, I raised a child with severe problems and I was there for him. I found my life deeply fulfilling. Why? Well, because she was part of a bigger story apart from her own individual happiness. And Viktor Frankl says that human beings, we need meaning in order to have fulfilling lives. And that's what Jesus Christ is offering us. And that's what the whole Bible is actually all about. That you are part of a grand, epic story that you find your place in. And one of the biographies of Jesus, called the Gospel of John, it's written by one of Jesus' followers, John. He writes one of the Gospels, and he starts his Gospel off, as Deb read, like this. He says, in the beginning was the Word. Now, this was originally written in Greek, and that word is logos in the Greek, and we'll come to that in just a second. So it says, in the beginning was the Word, the logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And in him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, come back to verse 1 of John's Gospel. So John's Gospel opens like this. It's a biography of Jesus, and John the writer, he drops this philosophical time bomb on his first hearers, because the idea of a logos is what the Greeks in Jesus' day constantly were debating. Is there a logos? Is there a meaning? Is there an understanding? Is there a reason for life behind the universe? That's what the Greeks were looking for, a spiritual, cosmic order or structure behind the universe, a reason for living. And they said that if there was one, if they're able to find a reason for living, if there really was this structure behind reality, then maybe we'd be able to align our lives with them, and we'd stop breaking down as societies and individuals. It's a little bit like a bread toaster. So imagine a bread toaster. It cooks and toasts bread. You know what a toaster is? Good. Imagine I'm sitting in a bath and I'm there for 15 minutes and I've used all the hot water to fill up, and now the water's getting a little bit cold, and I'd like to be a little bit warmer, a little bit toastier. So I come up with a bright idea. There's no more hot water in the tank. I know, if I'm wanting to feel a bit more toasty, Liz, can you go grab the toaster, plug it in, and let's drop it in the bath? Do you think that would work? Of course it wouldn't work. It'd blow up. I'd get electrocuted. We'd burn the house down, right? Now, why is that? Well, it has to do with the logos, the design of the toaster. There's a purpose, there's a reason for the toaster's existence, and if I don't align my use of it with the designer's purpose for it, I'll destroy it, I'll destroy myself, and I'll destroy my house. Now, you have a logos. God made you, and he made you for a purpose. And your life will blow up unless you align your life to the purpose for which God has set for you. In the beginning was this logos. There is a reason, there is a purpose. You have been designed by a God who knows you and loves you, and you need to align your life to what his design is. Now, what is his design? What is this logos? What is this meaning or reason for living which the Bible offers us? I think most people misunderstand Christianity at this point. They'll say, okay, yeah, right, it's a set of laws. But look at this. It says, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. He was with God in the beginning. So the Logos is not an abstract set of principles, but it is a person according to the Bible. In fact, this is speaking about Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of God, who came to the world. He is the Logos. So there is a structure behind the universe to get in touch with, that you need to align your life with, but it's not an abstract set of principles, it's a person. It's Jesus Christ. And the meaning of your life is to know him and be known by him. The meaning of life is a relationship. It's when you realize that you're made by God and for God. Now, it's fascinating because secular studies are discovering that that kind of is true. So there's a guy by the name of Robert Waldinger. Has anyone seen this TED Talk? It's like in the top 5 TED Talks ever watched, 37 million views. And he's a Harvard professor, and he does a study on what makes for a good life. And he quotes a Harvard study that traces the lives of over 700 men over 70 years who were asked the question, what makes a good life? And he found that at the end of 70 years, over 700 men, what led to a good life was not whether you'd paid your mortgage off, was not whether you'd earned $1 million, was not whether you'd become a CEO. It all came down to this: the quality of your relationships. That's what they accounted for a good life. Am I being loved? And am I loving someone else? Not just romantic relationships, but the quality of relationships in your life. And somehow we've been designed for relationships. And I think we feel most fulfilled, that our lives are most meaningful when we're experiencing that. So I remember 15 years ago, I went on a surf trip to Indonesia. I was actually there on a mission trip, teaching in some Bible colleges. But before I did the mission trip, I decided I'll get there a little bit early by myself and go surfing in paradise, right? The waves were epic, but I hated it. Waves are great, but I didn't have anyone to share that with. So it wasn't meaningful or pleasurable experience. Then last year, I went on a surf trip up to Seal Rocks with Tom and a couple of other guys, friends at church, and we got tiny waves, didn't we, Tom? Wasn't very good, but we were together, and I was with mates, and we sat around the campfire, and we went surfing on foamies, and we had a great time. It was meaningful because I shared the moment with others. The happiest times of our life are when they're shared, and I guess the question is, well, is there an ultimate relationship? You can have buddy relationships, romantic relationships, but is there an ultimate relationship? Is there a God who made me and loves me and wants a relationship with me? And so notice the next part of the Gospel of John. In verse 14, we're told that the Logos, this reason for being, became flesh, became human, and he made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So the Logos, he comes to us. He's not something that needs to be discovered through philosophical reflection. No, he is a person. The meaning of your life comes into your life, comes into our world to be known. He doesn't stay out of reach. A number of years ago, I picked up a book by Dorothy Sayers, who writes detective fiction. Any Dorothy Sayers fans? None of us. Tim Keller, who I love, one of my favorite preachers, he doesn't stop talking about Dorothy Sayers. So I'm like, I better read a Dorothy Sayers book. So I pick up Dorothy Sayers, and Dorothy Sayers was one of the first female graduates of Oxford University, and she becomes this novelist, and some of her novels are just detective, they're detective genre, and she writes these novels about Lord Peter Wimsey, a detective who in the first number of novels, he's single, he's alone, there's no love interest, but then about halfway through the series, this woman shows up by the name of Harriet Vane. She's not particularly attractive, but she just so happens to have been in the novel, she just so happens to have been one of the first female graduates of Oxford University who also writes detective fiction. And commentators of Dorothy Sayers, they're like, what's going on here? Well, Harriet Vane falls in love with Lord Peter Wimsey. They get married and they solve mysteries together. And people are like, what's going on? Like, how does this woman show up who seems to be very similar to the author? And some people speculate that Dorothy Sayers looked into a world that she's created. She looks at a character that she's created, and she sees his pain and his loneliness, and she actually falls in love with him, and so she writes herself into the story to save him through this love interest. And that's a great picture of what we're learning about here, because God is the author of our universe. And as he looks on our world, on the world he made, on us, destroying ourselves, destroying each other, a world that is haunted by God, but one in which we've rejected him, a world of sin and pain and anger and destruction and alienation. And he looks on in this world with great pain and anger at all the injustice. And because he loves us, he chooses to write himself into the story. The Word, the Logos, the reason for existence, God himself takes on human flesh to save us from the place that we have plunged ourselves into. God looks at the world he's created. He sees we need salvation, and he writes himself into the story. That's the meaning of life, that there is a grand story behind the universe, and God is part of that, and he knows you, and he loves you, he made you, and he's done something for you in coming as the person of Jesus Christ. There's another TED talk by a lady called Sophie Scott, and she's a neuroscientist, and she looks at the science of laughter. Has anyone watched this one? We're not TED aficionados here, apparently. Okay, well, she gives this talk about laughter, and she asks the question, she found that human beings are 20 times more likely to laugh at something if we're with someone we know or trust. So it's not just the quality of the jokes that I'm telling today that will make you laugh. The real determining factor is, are you sitting next to someone you know and trust? If you're sitting next to someone you know and trust, my jokes are way funnier than if you're not sitting next to someone you know or trust. And it's very interesting, isn't it? That this is what we're seeing, that it's who you share the moment with that leads to fulfillment and happiness and even laughter in life. It's not what we do. It's not the quality of the music. It's not what we eat or drink or the experiences we have. It's who you're with that brings meaning and fulfillment in life. And in fact, if that's the case, you can even be fulfilled and have meaning when you're suffering. It's why we visit people in hospital. It's to share a moment. And you go to hospital, there's grief, there's pain, but you walk away from that and say, that was meaningful. There was some kind of purpose to that experience. That was more fulfilling than watching an episode of something on Netflix. Even though Netflix is way more exciting, way more happy, way more entertaining, but it's empty. Whereas you go and you spend time with someone who's suffering, or you yourself suffer, but you share a moment with someone else, and you feel there's some kind of meaning here. We're part of a bigger story. And so this is what we're seeing. The Logos is Jesus. He became flesh. He became one of us. And so the meaning of your life, it's not about what you do. It's not about what you own. It's not about what you know. It's not about what you achieve. In the end, no. Jesus is saying the meaning of life is who you get to share your life with, who you share the moment with. And if you get that, there will be ultimate fulfillment and purpose. And it really comes down to sharing your life with Jesus. And that's what being a Christian is. Jesus is inviting us to become part of his kingdom, to become his friend, to join Team Jesus, to become part of his family. And for this, the ultimate story, it makes sense. There is a God who loves us, who made us, who designed us for a relationship with him. He comes to save us. He dies for us that we might be reconciled to him. I'm a Christian because I think there is a bigger purpose to my life than my own comfort, success, and happiness. I get to be part of Team Jesus and be part of his mission to bring life, love, and freedom to the world. Now, the real test of whether you found a story bigger than your own story that can give you meaning in life, the real test is will that meaning, can it hang around even if you're suffering? And this is what Viktor Frankl found. He said in the death camps, there were some people who their meaning in life was their relationship with their wife. Their meaning in life was their career in academia. Their meaning in life was their children. And when they went into the death camps, their meaning was taken away from them. And he said that when a person doesn't have a meaning in the death camp, so you're there, you know your wife's in the camp next door and she's been gassed to death. If she's the meaning for your life and she's no longer there, he said people who lost their meaning, they ended up shriveling and dying. So here's the real test. You need a meaning in your life that can survive suffering and even death itself. And that's why my family bring me lots of meaning in my life. Leading this church brings me lots of meaning. My health, surfing, brings me lots of meaning in my life. But all of those things can be stolen away from me. And if I place my absolute meaning in life in those things, then my meaning is incredibly fragile. The only thing in my life that can survive death is whether I'm loved and known by God himself. Let me leave you with this. I could make my wife my meaning in life, but if she died, I don't know whether I'd be able to survive. If God is my meaning in life, and if my wife died, I'd be devastated. But I do think I'd be able to survive. And that's because I have a meaning that is still there. And that's what Jesus is offering us. As Christians, our relationship with one another, our work, our sport, there's a lot of meaning in our lives, which isn't just God. But the real issue is, do you have a meaning in your life that can survive death, that can survive disaster? Jesus offers you that. He knows you, he made you, he loved you, he entered the world to come and rescue you so that you might be friends with him. There's no other meaning that will ground you today and ground you for eternity.